Welcome to Battle, the site of the Battle of Hastings in 1066, and today a tranquil market town in the heart of rural Sussex, just a stone's throw from England's beautiful south coast. A town full of heritage that encompasses both the legacy of one of the most important battles in world history and more. There's so much to see and discover in Battle, but we begin our walk here on the town's market square, which is fairly quiet at this point on a warm summer's evening. Typically, Battle's market takes place in and around the town's popular Bandstand here, and the presence of a market tells us a lot about the history of this area. Back in 1066, when the battle that gave this town its name happened, this area of the country was simply a wide expanse of fields with very few local inhabitants, although there was still industry present in the region, the area well known in the medieval era for its salt production. Taking a look at a map, we can see exactly where Battle is located, just north of the seaside town of Hastings, in a scenic area of countryside known as the High Weald, home to stunning rolling hills that we'll catch a glimpse of at the end of our walk. Here, meanwhile, we're passing by an equally beautiful garden, known as the Almonry, which is one of a number of lovely gardens around Battle's Heritage Museum, cared for by local volunteers, and it provides a wonderful place to retreat to from Battle's long high street, where you'll find much of the town's riveting history. From here, we'll briefly walk up to the top of the high street, before we head back towards the site of the Battle of Hastings. Now here on the northern edge of town, we find the town's library on our left, and a welcome sign across the road on our right, which reads Battle 1066, one of many memorials around the town dedicated to the clash that occurred here almost 1,000 years ago. The top of the high street, and the entrance to the town centre from the north, is marked by a roundabout, at the centre of which we can see another such memorial to the Battle of Hastings, a metal sculpture unveiled in 2016 that depicts two knights fighting during that historic confrontation. Rather interestingly, the sculpture helped this roundabout to be named as one of the world's best roundabouts in 2017, one of just a number of landmarks in this town associated with the legacy of the Battle of Hastings. But as we now turn around to head back down the high street, what exactly was the Battle of Hastings? Well, as you'll no doubt know, the battle, which took place here on the 14th of October 1066, was one of the most important events in English, British and world history, as the Anglo-Saxon King Harold Godwinson was defeated by one William the Conqueror. Now at the time, William was the Duke of Normandy in the northwest of what is today France, but he sought to expand his territories, laying claim to the English throne after the death of Edward the Confessor earlier in 1066. As such, William assembled an army to take control of England, and after crossing the Channel from France, he landed at Pevensey to the south of here, and gradually began making his way north. Here at what is today Battle, William's invading armies met Harold's defending forces, resulting in a major clash that famously saw the English King Harold killed in battle, handing victory to William as he went on to become the first Norman King of England. The birth of the Norman era ushered in a new age of French influence in England, a major part of which transformed the traditionally Germanic local language of English with an influx of Latin influence, a development that's more evident in Battle than anywhere. This small cul-de-sac, a French word on its own, named Rue de Bayeux, referring to the town in Normandy that's home to the famous Bayeux Tapestry. We'll talk more about the Battle of Hastings and the Bayeux Tapestry later, but let's first clear up something about the impact of the Normans on England. Despite the increased Latin influence on the English language, the Norman invaders weren't French as such, but rather descended from Vikings, who had taken control of the region of Normandy 150 years before the Battle of Hastings. Passing by the town's 16th century Gildhall across the road, the unique Viking heritage of the Normans gave them a separate identity from what would become France. William the Conqueror himself descended from the Vikings in Normandy, and we'll talk more about that later on. Now, for a moment, let's take a brief turn off the High Street onto Mount Street, where you'll find what may be the oldest pub in Battle, the Old King's Head, first built over 600 years ago in 1421, and which is neighboured by a row of cottages, some of the oldest dwellings in this town also dating from the 15th century. The oldest part of these houses was built back in 1433, and while renovations over the centuries have kept them in rather good condition, they make up a string of characterful medieval buildings here on Mount Street. One of these historic buildings was likely once the place where the local blacksmith worked, just next door to the popular Old King's Head, named, as you'd imagine, for William the Conqueror. Hanging outside the front of the pub is a portrait of William himself, although William's reign came to an end centuries before any of the buildings we can see here were built, as Battle eventually grew into a village and then a town of its own in the late medieval era. From what was once an area composed entirely of fields on which the Great Battle of 1066 had been fought, there emerged this small civilian settlement, and here we're passing down a small lane known as Old Lady's Court, which is reminiscent of the many twittons that existed in medieval Battle. The word twitton is simply a local Sussex term used for an alleyway between houses, and you'll still find a number of twittons in the modern town of Battle, most of which emerged off the high street as the village of Battle began to grow in size. Old Lady's Court leads us back onto the high street, where we can see more of this town's fetching medieval style architecture, such as Friar House just in front of us here. Now home to a delightful antique jewellery store, Friar House was built all the way back in 1642, and has had a variety of uses over the years, having served as both a local bakery and a museum in the past, standing just 2 doors along the high street from another pub. Here we can see the Bull Inn, which in its current form dates from 1688, when the pub was rebuilt after its predecessor was destroyed in a fire. Before the fire, the pub was used as the kitchen of Battle Abbey, whose stones were used to rebuild it as the Bull Inn as we see it today. Now Battle Abbey, which stands further down at the other end of the high street, is by far the oldest landmark in this town, founded all the way back in 1071, just a few years after the Battle of Hastings. We'll take a detailed look at Battle Abbey when we reach it in a few moments, but how exactly did this town develop in the centuries directly after 1066? Well, in the early medieval era, Battle extended along this road out from the Abbey, initially developing a small leather industry, bringing moderate wealth to civilians here as the settlement gradually grew. As a part of that leather industry, this building across the road from us was the local cobblers around the 12th century, and it was later rebuilt in the 17th century as a pharmacy, at a time when Battle underwent one of its most prosperous periods in history. During the 17th century, Battle here emerged as the centre for the manufacture of gunpowder in England, local mills surrounding the town bringing in great wealth, as Battle supplied gunpowder to the British Army for the best part of 200 years, up until the Crimean War of the 1850s. But gunpowder wasn't the only famous product to come out of Battle, as the centre of town was once home to a large jam factory, located down this alleyway off the high street. Owned by Newbery Preserves, the old jam factory operated in Battle until the 1980s, and its entrance stood across the road from the town's majestic former bank, adorned with a clock built to celebrate the year 2000. Along the high street, we've already seen a wide range of architecture, from medieval buildings to impressive Georgian landmarks and more modern 20th century edifices, and it goes to show how Battle is a town that really celebrates its varied heritage, even beyond the iconic Battle of 1066. However, just down the road from here, we'll find the oldest and most famous building in town, Battle Abbey, the point from which the town we know today first grew. As we mentioned, Battle Abbey was founded in 1071, and it's commonly believed to mark the exact site of the Battle of Hastings itself. Used as a monastery in the medieval era, the abbey was originally founded on the orders of William the Conqueror himself, for what's thought to be 2 main reasons. For William, Battle Abbey, built on the site of his greatest victory, served as a memorial to the Norman conquest of England, but it's also possible that the abbey served as an act of penance for William, after his Norman armies had killed thousands of local English people during their conquest of the nation. Most importantly, however, Battle Abbey came to serve as a real show of power and authority for William over his newly conquered Kingdom of England, although at the time, the building didn't quite have the imposing appearance that it does today, as this spectacular gatehouse was added later on in history in 1338, when Battle Abbey was fortified in defence against potential French invasion at the start of the 100 Years' War. While that invasion never came, the castle-style fortifications of Battle Abbey have only added to its appeal, the iconic gatehouse now serving as the entrance to the grounds of the abbey, as well as the battlefield of the Battle of Hastings. Inside, you'll find the ruins of the 11th century monastery of Battle Abbey, which existed for just under 400 years before it was eventually dissolved on the orders of King Henry VIII in 1538. But before its dissolution, the monastic community of Battle Abbey stood right at the heart of the wider civilian community, in which a market was established in the medieval era. The presence of the abbey and a market turned this once almost entirely unpopulated area into a place of pilgrimage for both worshippers and traders, many of whom would come to the town and rest just beside the abbey. Just in the shadow of the abbey's mighty gatehouse, here we find the place where those people would sleep when stopping off in battle, this house of 1420, rather sensibly named Pilgrim's Rest. With the advent of more modern hotels for visitors to stay in nowadays, the Pilgrim's Rest, which has been carefully restored in recent years, is now used as a popular wedding venue, but whose medieval exterior gives a striking reminder of the town's long history. Of course, Battle's illustrious history is one of the reasons that the town, even today, remains a popular place with visitors, the Abbey complex in particular, a major tourist destination, with tours of both the monastery ruins and the battlefield on offer. Now, the battlefield, on which the Battle of Hastings was fought over 9 hours on that October day, was located primarily between 2 hills that surround the modern town of Battle. Here, just in front of Battle Abbey, is a small ridge where it's thought that King Harold's defensive line was positioned as the armies of William the Conqueror approached from the south, with the 2 forces then coming to blows in the fields where the Abbey grounds now exist. Unfolding throughout the day, William's Norman armies struck a hammer blow to the Anglo-Saxons as dusk began to set in, as King Harold was famously killed by what is thought to have been an arrow in the eye, causing his armies to collapse and handing an ultimately easy victory to the Normans. The death of King Harold likely happened not too far from this point, the site of Battle's old bull ring on what's known as the Abbey Green, which is also locally famous as the historic home of Battle's Bonfire celebrations, before they were moved to be held on the battlefield from 1998 onwards. Abbey Green here, though, still hosts small bonfires every bonfire night, which, having been celebrated in this town every year since 1646, holds a special status, as Battle is home to the world's oldest bonfire society, the Battle Bonfire Boys, who were founded in 1646, the year of the first celebration of the event, which of course marks the failed gunpowder plot to blow up the Houses of Parliament in 1605. Accordingly, the gunpowder that the crew involving Guy Fawkes aimed to use in their attempted act of terrorism was manufactured here in Battle, another surprising claim to fame of this town beyond the famous battle. Of course, back in 1066, there was no gunpowder used in the Battle of Hastings, but why exactly did the battle occur? Why did William want to invade England? And why did Harold lose the battle? Well, as we now head away from the heart of Battle's gorgeous town centre, William the Conqueror claimed that Harold was ruling as a dishonourable, sacrilegious king who had usurped his rightful claim to the English throne. As a result, William set about an invasion of England, supported by the Pope, and although it was expected that his Norman armies would meet fierce resistance after crossing the Channel, they actually landed unopposed at Pevensey on the 28th of September 1066. The reason for this was that William wasn't the only foreign nobleman laying claim to Harold's throne, as just 3 days before his landing at Pevensey, a crucial battle for the future of England was taking place about 250 miles to the north in Yorkshire, where Harold took victory at the Battle of Stamford Bridge over the Norwegian King Harald Hardrada, who was also laying claim to the English throne. Despite his victory, Harold Godwinson and his armies had to rush down to Sussex here to fight the Normans, and exhausted from their previous battle and all that time in the face of a fresh invading force, the Anglo-Saxons stood little chance when it came to the Battle of Hastings. So, that's the story of how the Battle of Hastings was won and lost, but we now find ourselves looking at the Church of St Mary the Virgin, Battle's beautiful 12th century parish church. Built over 900 years ago in 1115, the church here has been at the heart of the local community ever since it grew up on the outskirts of William the Conqueror's Abbey. The church was founded by the head of the abbey next door, and he intended for it to be the place of worship for what was viewed as a growing rural village. Owing to its proximity to Battle Abbey, St Mary the Virgin here was afforded a special degree of autonomy from the rule of the Bishop of Chichester, who directed most churches on this part of England's south coast. Just across the channel from here, meanwhile, you'll find the village whose name we can see on the sign above, Saint-Valery-sur-Somme, a gorgeous and historic French commune that's twinned with Battle here. Only about 70 miles separate Battle and Saint-Valery-sur-Somme, and the two places share a deep connection, as back in 1066, it was at the French seaside settlement that William the Conqueror assembled his armies as he readied for the invasion of England. Later on in history, meanwhile, Saint-Valery-sur-Somme actually became a part of the Kingdom of England during the reign of King Henry VI. Henry VI was actually crowned King of France in 1431 while ruling as King of England, and in that same year, the local jail in Saint-Valery-sur-Somme was used by English authorities to imprison none other than the French heroine Joan of Arc. There's a lot of history to Battle's twin town across the channel, and hopefully one day we'll pop over there to explore Saint-Valery-sur-Somme. But let's bring our attention back to Sussex and the story of how Battle emerged into the gorgeous town that we know today. With its own parish church, a flourishing abbey and a local market, medieval Battle became an attractive place to live for many, complemented by a growing portfolio of industries, from leather to gunpowder and jam over the centuries as we've mentioned. Today though, the town is home to just over 6,000 people, with almost all of those traditional industries now replaced by tourism, the town's history and landmarks drawing in thousands of visitors every year. But Battle is also a bit of a haven for commuters who live here and work in London, to which this town is linked by direct train at Battle's railway station, located further down this road. As for other facilities in Battle, the town's Abbey grounds are also home to a large school simply known as Battle Abbey School, meaning that the Abbey, even 5 centuries after its monastery was dissolved in 1538, still serves an important role in the town to this day. Of course, when the Abbey was dissolved on the orders of Henry VIII, the monks who lived and worked inside were forced out. The head of the Abbey, or Abbot for example, moving to live inside this cottage after his monastery was shut down. The Abbot's cottage is one of a number of medieval homes along this part of Battle's main road, which proudly showcase the town's amazing heritage, with stories aplenty, from the tale of one of history's most important battles, to riveting industries and local tales to be found in its many beautiful buildings, from hotels to shops, houses and pubs. But speaking of pubs, there's a small score that we need to settle as we approach the southern edge of town here. Just across the road, we can see the Chequers, the self-styled oldest pub in Battle. Built in 1478, the Chequers served as a medieval coaching inn, but it's possible that it might not be Battle's oldest pub, as you might remember that the Old King's Head on Mount Street was first built in 1421. You'd think that would mean the Old King's Head is older, but only parts of that pub date from 1421, 57 years before the Chequers was established, and as such it's very much up for debate as to which is considered the oldest, though both are charming places to stop for a pint, and another window into battle's history. As brutal and deadly as the Battle of Hastings was, however, it was fought among some utterly gorgeous scenery, that being the rolling hills of the High Weald, which makes up a major part of the Sussex countryside. Here, we're looking over the High Weald as the sun sets at about 6 o'clock in the evening, around the time when the Battle of Hastings came to an end nearly 1,000 years ago. And just here, we find a plaque pointing towards the many places associated with the legendary battle that took place right here. The legacy of the Battle of Hastings has spread far and wide, not just around Sussex and Normandy, but to every corner of the world over the past millennium. And it was right here in this gorgeous town that hugely significant battle was fought. Sadly, however, this now brings us to the end of our walk around Battle. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you're now looking forward to visiting Battle for yourself in future too.